The battlefield smelled of ash and old blood when Jedediah Easton walked onto it, and he almost turned straight back around. He had not come looking for a fight. He had not come looking for anything, really, except the 3 steel-jaw traps he had set along the creek ridge before the raiding party swept through the valley and turned the whole borderland into a slaughterhouse. 3 traps worth more coin than he'd see in a month of lean pelts, and he needed them back before the early snows locked the high passes and stranded him in the lowlands for winter. That was the whole reason. Traps. It was a deeply unglamorous errand. What he found instead was her. She stood in the center of the field like something carved out of the gray morning itself, a monument among the fallen. The dead lay in heaps around her, human soldiers and orc raiders alike, and she was the only thing still upright for a quarter-mile in any direction. Her armor was shattered at the shoulder, a long gash running from her collarbone down across her ribs where something had gotten through the leather. She still held her axe, though her arm trembled with the effort of it, and the blade was dark to the hilt. Her skin was the color of deep pine shadow, a rich green-gray that caught the pale morning light like polished stone. Her black hair was matted with blood and grime, braided back but half destroyed by the fighting, loose strands hanging across a face that was even ruined and war-painted as it was striking enough to stop a man cold. Her tusks were the short, curved kind that sat beneath her lower lip, ivory white and clean despite everything. Her eyes, when they found him, were amber, not dull amber, burning amber, like a hawk's eye right before the stoop. She tracked him across the field the way a predator tracks something it hasn't decided to kill yet. Jedediah stopped walking. He raised both hands, slowly, palms out. He had a long knife on his hip and a short bow across his back, and neither of those things would help him if she decided to close the 30 yards between them, so he left them alone. "I'm not a soldier," he said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I'm a trapper. I had gear out on the ridge before all this happened." He nodded toward the distant tree line. "I'm just here to collect it." She didn't move. The axe trembled again, and this time he saw how much it was costing her: the white-knuckle grip, the locked jaw, the slight lean to one side that told him she was favoring something bad. The gash across her ribs, something worse that he couldn't see yet. "There is no one left," she said. Her voice was deep and controlled, the kind of voice that had given orders and expected them followed, but it had a rough, scraped edge to it now, like a blade that had been used past its limit. She spoke the common tongue with an accent that carried the rolling consonants of the Eastern Orc clans. "My warband is dead. The human soldiers are dead. I do not know who won." "Doesn't look like anybody won," Jedediah said. Something shifted in her expression. Not softness, more like a brief, exhausted acknowledgement that he wasn't entirely wrong. "You should not be here," she told him. "The Redvane Company scouts will sweep this field before midday. They find an orc standing among their dead, they will not ask questions." "I know the Redvane Company," Jedediah said. "That's exactly why I'm suggesting we both move along." "I cannot," she stopped herself. The axe dipped. Her entire frame shuddered once, a full-body tremor she clearly hadn't intended to show, and Jedediah took 2 quick steps forward before he'd consciously decided to. She didn't swing at him. She did lower herself to one knee slowly, with the rigid, controlled descent of someone who had decided that kneeling on her own terms was better than collapsing on the ground's terms. He crouched in front of her. Up close, the damage was worse. The gash across her ribs was deep and still weeping. Her right leg, hidden until now by the angle she'd been standing, had taken a crossbow bolt through the meat of the thigh. The bolt was gone, she'd pulled it herself, by the look of the ragged entry wound, but the bleeding had not fully stopped. "Your name," he said, not a question. He was already pulling the linen wrap from inside his coat. She looked at him the way people look at things that are unexpected enough to be briefly fascinating. "Urzoth Bloodhorn," she said, "of the Stonecrest clan." "Jedediah Easton," he said, "of the High Mountain line, which is nobody's clan but mine." He pressed the linen against her side. She didn't flinch, but her breathing went sharp. "Can you walk?" I walked through 3 of your soldiers tonight, Urzoth said. That's not what I asked. A pause, another of those measuring looks. Not far, she admitted, and he could tell that it cost her something to say it. Then we don't go far, he said. We go to the tree line and we go now, and we figure the rest out when we're not standing in the middle of what's about to be a Redvane patrol ground. He tied off the linen as tightly as he dared, stood, and held out his hand. Urzoth Bloodhorn looked at his hand for a moment. Then she took it. She was heavier than she looked, which was saying something because she already looked like she'd been built for endurance by someone who didn't believe in compromises. She stood a full head taller than him, broad-shouldered and long-limbed, and when she took her weight on the wounded leg, her whole body went rigid with the effort of not making a sound. He got her arm over his shoulder and they started toward the tree line, moving as fast as the uneven ground and her injury would allow. You do not have to do this, she said, after about 100 yards. I noticed the traps somewhere over that ridge anyway, Jedediah said, so I'm going in that direction regardless. You are a very bad liar, Urzoth said. I'm a spectacular liar, he said. I'm just choosing not to lie to you specifically. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, too rough and too surprised to be a laugh, but close. They made the tree line before the first Redvane horn sounded in the valley below, and Jedediah Easton looked back once at the ruined field, the last orc standing, now walking beside him, and then he faced forward and led her home. His camp was 2 miles east into the mountain pine, a trapper's setup rather than anything comfortable. A lean-to of lashed spruce boughs, a fire ring of flat stones, a cache of salted meat and hard biscuit in a sealed tin hung from a branch to keep the bears honest. He had a bedroll, a canvas rain sheet, a small pot, and a kit of basic medical supplies, because a man who worked a mountain trap line alone had better know how to deal with a gash or a broken bone without walking 3 days to the nearest settlement. He put Urzoth near the fire, banked it low so the light wouldn't carry, and unpacked his kit. She submitted to being tended with the particular stillness of someone who was accustomed to dealing with their own injuries, and found the process of being helped faintly baffling. She watched his hands work cleaning the gash, stitching the worst of it with the curved needle he kept wrapped in oiled cloth, binding the leg wound with that amber scrutiny that seemed to measure everything it touched. How long have you been on this field? He asked, mostly to keep her talking because shock was a real concern and he'd feel better if she stayed conscious. Since before dawn, she said. The raid began at midnight. He had heard it from his high camp, the distant sound of it rolling up the mountain like thunder. He had stayed put, as a man alone and unaffiliated stayed put when armies moved through borderlands. He had waited for morning. What was the objective? The raid. The Stonecrest clan was contracted to the Lord of Durnholt, she said, with a flatness that told him she had complicated feelings about that. To raid the Redvane supply line, force a withdrawal from the Durnholt borderland. We were promised gold and passage rights through the mountain territories. And instead the Redvane company hit you from 2 sides, he said. They knew we were coming, Urzoth said. Someone sold the plan. She was quiet for a moment. My war leader was killed in the first charge. I held the rear so the survivors could pull back through the creek canyon. She looked at the cold, dark field beyond the tree line. I did not think there would be no survivors to pull back. There was no self-pity in it, just the flat reckoning of a warrior who had looked at the full cost and was still in the process of counting. You held the rear alone, he asked. There were 4 of us at the start, she said. He finished tying off the leg wound and sat back on his heels. In the low firelight she was remarkable, powerful and battered and oddly dignified, wearing the wreckage of the fight the way a mountain wears a rockslide, like something that had happened to it and had not ultimately changed what it was. She wore a fitted warrior's leather, double-stitched and form-following, the kind a fighter had made for them rather than pulled off a supply cart. What remained of it was still tailored close across her torso and hips, despite the torn shoulder and the blood. Her proportions were overwhelming in the honest way that had nothing to do with embellishment. She was simply that, And Jedediah, who had spent enough time alone in the mountains to be uncomplicated about being affected by things, was affected. He looked away and put his kit back together. "You need to stay off the leg for at least 2 days," he said. "The stitching on your side will hold if you don't pull it." "I cannot stay here 2 days," she said. "The Redvane Company won't come up into the high pine because they have no reason to," he said. "They'll sweep the field and the creek valley and they'll move on. They're a contract company. They get paid by the campaign, not by the cleanup." She considered this. "You know them well." "I sold furs to their quartermaster 3 winters running," he said. "They're not bad men, they're not good men either. They're professional men, which mostly means they do what they're paid for and nothing they're not." "You are a practical person," Urzoth said. "Mountain trapping doesn't leave much room for the impractical," he said. She was quiet for a while. The fire popped. Somewhere up the ridge, an owl called and fell silent. Jedediah made a thin broth from the salted meat and dried herbs he kept for exactly this kind of situation. The kind of situation where someone needed warmth from the inside out and handed her the pot without ceremony. She took it, drank from it, didn't say thank you but looked at him in a way that was, he thought, the orc equivalent. "Why?" she asked after a while. He looked up. "Why what?" "You are human," she said. "I am orc. This borderland has been at war for 6 years. Every man in this territory with a sword or a musket has picked a side. Why did you carry me off that field?" He thought about it, which was the honest answer to a straight question. "You were wounded," he said. "You were standing alone in an open field about to get swept by a patrol. You hadn't done anything to me." "My people have done things to your people," she said. "Your people and my people are a long, complicated story," he said. "You specifically haven't done anything to me specifically. That's how I tend to work it out." Urzoth Bloodhorn looked at him for a long time, not the hawk-measuring look from the field, something else. More careful and more curious, like she was revising a calculation that hadn't expected a new variable. "Sleep," he said. "I'll take first watch." She slept, eventually, with the heavy immediacy of a body that had simply run out of choice. He watched the tree line and the distant smudge of the field, and thought about 3 steeljaw traps he still hadn't retrieved, and the long winter ahead, and the woman sleeping by his small fire, and the way everything had shifted in the course of one gray morning from ordinary to something else entirely. By the second day, she was sitting up and asking pointed questions about the territory. By the third day, she was moving under her own power, stiff and careful, but moving. She helped him find the traps, which were exactly where he'd said they were, and she carried 2 of them when he would have carried all 3, in the flat, matter-of-fact way she seemed to do most things. Not asking, just deciding and then doing. He cooked. She mended her armor with gut thread from his kit, and the combination of her massive, scarred hands and the tiny needle produced results that were actually competent, better than his own rough patches on gear. He asked about it and she told him without any particular sentiment that a Stonecrest warrior learned to maintain their own kit from the age of 8, because a warrior who relied on someone else to keep them battle-ready was a warrior who would die on a day when that someone else was unavailable. "Do your people have a word for that?" he asked. "For that kind of self-reliance?" "Vraknesh," she said. "It means something like standing without needing to lean." She thought about it. "Or leaning only on things you have tested yourself." "That's a good word," he said. She tilted her head and looked at him with that measuring quality that was becoming familiar to him. "Your people do not have such a word. We have independence," he said. "It's got the same basic idea, but it doesn't say anything about the testing." Urzoth seemed to find this satisfying in some way. She went back to her stitching. After a moment, "You have tested your own." It wasn't a question. He took it as the thing it was, a statement of acknowledgement from a woman who did not hand those out without cause. "I've been alone on this line for 4 years, he said. "Before that I worked a partner line down in the Calver Valley, but my partner went south to marry and I didn't have anywhere particular to go, so I went up." He gestured at the surrounding pines, the hard mountain sky. "Up worked fine." "You were not lonely?" she asked. "Sure," he said. "That's different from it not working." She seemed to consider this at length. He didn't press. One of the things he'd learned in 4 years of his own company was that silence wasn't the enemy of conversation. It was just the space between one thought and the next. On the fourth morning, when the leg wound had stopped seeping and the stitches on her side were holding clean, she told him about the ransom demand. She told it plainly, the way she told most things. A letter had arrived at the Stonecrest camp 3 weeks before the raid, carried by a human rider who'd ridden under a white rag that the clan's border watchers had respected. The letter was from a Lord Harwick Crane of the lowland Crane Fort, a landowner of middling ambition and outsized cruelty, and it stated that he was holding 12 members of the Stonecrest clan's extended kin group. Not warriors, family. Old ones and young adults who had been living in the mixed settlement of Border Keep, where humans and orcs had coexisted badly but functionally for a generation. Crane had seized them during a sweep of the settlement he claimed as a pacification action. His ransom demand was simple: 10,000 silver marks to be delivered to Cranefort within 40 days of the letter's date, or he would sell the captives south into the labor markets, where orcs disappeared and did not come back. 40 days from when? Jedediah asked. From the date on the letter, Urzoth said, which was 9 days before the rider reached our camp. We have, she calculated, 18 days remaining. And the 10,000 marks. The Stonecrest clan does not have 10,000 marks, she said, with the flat, furious dignity of someone stating a wound without flinching from it. The raid was commissioned partly for that reason. The Lord of Durnholt promised a portion of the contract fee in advance, but our war leader is dead. The advance was on his person. I do not know where it is now. You think Crane knew about the advance, Jedediah said slowly. You think the raid tip-off was arranged so the war leader would die before delivering payment to the clan? Yes, Urzoth said. Crane is the kind of man who thinks in shapes like that. Jedediah sat with this for a moment. The fire popped. The mountain wind came through the pine tops in a long, low sound like a chord on a badly tuned instrument. 12 people, 18 days. Cranefort was a fortified manor house on the edge of the lowland plains. 4 days of hard travel from where they sat, even if you cut straight through the Redvane patrol territory they'd been carefully avoiding. You were going to Cranefort, he said, even before you could walk properly. I am the ranking warrior of the Stonecrest clan still living, Urzoth said. They are my responsibility. An orc woman walking into Cranefort alone with no silver is not a rescue, he said. It's a gift to Crane. Her eyes narrowed. I did not say I had a plan. I said I had a responsibility. Those are different things, he said. I know they are different things, she said, with an edge that told him he was close to a line. You think I do not know that? I think you're willing to walk into a bad situation on principle, he said, which I respect. I also think a bad situation entered on principle without a plan has the same outcome as a bad situation entered on principle with a plan, which is dead or captured, and Crane's ransom problem doesn't get solved either way. She stared at him. He had the distinct impression that people did not often speak to her this way. He'd also been alone in the mountains for 4 years, and had no particular instinct for tempering his honest assessment of a situation. Then what do you suggest? She asked, with a precision that told him she was interested despite herself. I suggest we figure out where the war leader's advance payment ended up, he said. The Redvane company would have stripped the body and any valuables on the field. If the advance was coin, it went into their quartermaster's locked chest, and I know their quartermaster. You said yourself the Redvane company are professional men, Urzoth said. They will not give stolen coin to an orc. No, he said, but they might sell it back at pennies on the mark to a mountain trapper who's owed a favor if I position it right. He looked at her. If there's enough left after they're cut to put a meaningful offer in front of Crane, we have something to negotiate with. Crane wants the marks. He's a landowner, not a slaver by trade. If you walk in with real silver and a real offer, he might take it. And if he doesn't, she said, then we find another way, he said. But the walk to Cranefort goes through the Redvane camp at Milford anyway. We make that stop first, see what we can recover. She was looking at him the way she had on the first night, with that revising quality like she was updating a calculation. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Cranefort is not your errand. These are not your people." Jedediah looked at his hands, then back at her. "You need someone who knows the human side of this territory," he said. "I need someone who can make sure I don't get my neck broken by the first Stonecrest warrior we run into on the road, since I'll be traveling with an Orc clan marker." He looked pointedly at the Stonecrest clan braid she wore at her wrist. "It works out both ways." It was a practical answer. He gave it practically. It was also not entirely the truth, or not entirely the whole truth, and some part of him thought she knew that, and some part of him thought she was choosing to accept the practical framing because it made the next step easier for both of them. "When can you travel?" he asked. "Tomorrow," she said. "Day after," he said. "The stitching needs one more day." She opened her mouth. "Vraknesh," he said. She closed her mouth. A muscle in her jaw moved. Then, "Day after tomorrow," she said, and went back to her armor. They broke camp in the thin gray light of pre-dawn, moving quietly through the pine and birch forest that covered the high mountain flank. Jedediah had packed everything that mattered into a single frame pack, strapped the traps across the top, and traded his remaining furs to the cache tree for safekeeping. He'd come back for them, or he wouldn't, and either way they'd keep. He handed Urzoth one of the two short hunting bows as a matter of course, and she took it the same way. No comment, just the immediate practice check of the string tension and the cant of the limb that told him she'd been shooting since she was old enough to hold one. The road down from the high pine was a track, really two ruts through the rocky ground where mountain traders had passed often enough to flatten the vegetation. They moved along its edge rather than in it, keeping the tree cover as long as they could, and they moved quietly without discussing the need for quiet. It was the kind of natural coordination that Jedediah recognized from the few times he'd worked with a genuinely competent partner and which he'd missed, in the low-key way he missed things. Not acutely, but as a kind of awareness of absence. She kept up easily, despite the leg. Not comfortably. He could see the tightening around her eyes on the downhill sections where the bolt wound would pull, but with the focused, mechanical persistence of a woman who had decided that the leg was going to function, and that was that. Midway through the morning, when they had dropped below the cloud line and the eastern lowlands were visible as a brown-green spread below them, she said, "Tell me about the Redvane quartermaster." "Aldrich Piers," Jedediah said. "He's been with the company 12 years. He runs an honest ledger, which makes him unusual for a contract company. He owes me a favor from 2 winters back when I pulled his supply wagon out of a creek crossing gone bad. Not a dramatic favor, but real." "Is he a man who will let an orc through his camp gate?" "He'll let you through if I'm with you," Jedediah said. "Whether the rest of the camp will stay easy is another question. There'll be soldiers who were on that field 3 days ago." "I know," Urzoth said. "I want us to be clear on the same story," he said. "You are a Stonecrest clan representative coming to negotiate the return of property taken from the battlefield. I am your contracted guide and interpreter. We are not there for anything except the transaction." She looked at him sideways as they walked. "Contracted guide," she repeated. "It sounds better than trapper who found her in a field," he said. "Does it?" she said, dry as tinder. "Considerably." The Redvane camp at Milford occupied the flat ground at the base of the mountain road, a sprawl of company tents and rough-built shelters around a permanent stone mill building that they'd commandeered as a headquarters. There were maybe 200 soldiers in camp, in various states of maintenance and rest after the Valley campaign. Jedediah counted at least 40 who looked up when he and Urzoth walked through the gate, and he counted the expressions on those 40 faces, and none of them were welcoming. He put himself half a step ahead and slightly to her left, not shielding, because she didn't need shielding and he was too sensible to pretend otherwise, but present, visibly present. Establishing without words that he was with her and that her passage through this camp had a sponsor. A man stepped into their path about 30 yards inside the gate. He was young, a private or a corporal at best, and he had the flushed, tight-jawed look of recent grief mixed with fresh anger. He had probably lost someone on that field. "That's an orc," he said, looking at Jedediah as if Jedediah might have missed this fact. "She is," Jedediah agreed. "She's also a clan envoy here to conduct a legal recovery transaction with Quartermaster Piers, who knows we're coming." He did not know if Piers knew they were coming, but the statement was delivered with enough matter-of-fact certainty that it might as well have been true. "If you've got a dispute with that, take it to Piers." The soldier looked at Urzoth. Urzoth looked back at him. Her expression was entirely, unnervingly neutral. Not submissive, not aggressive, just present, like a mountain is present and about as easy to move. The soldier stepped aside. Piers was in the mill building's back room, surrounded by ledgers and supply crates, exactly where Jedediah had expected him to be. He was a compact, meticulous man in his middle 50s with close-cropped gray hair and reading spectacles he always seemed faintly embarrassed to be caught wearing. He looked up when Jedediah came through the door, looked past him at Urzoth, and took off the spectacles carefully and set them on the table. "Easton," he said. "Piers," Jedediah said. "I need to talk to you about the Valley Field." The conversation took 2 hours, which was an hour and 40 minutes of Piers explaining why what Jedediah was asking was impossible, followed by 20 minutes of Jedediah explaining why Piers was going to do it anyway, conducted in the low, pleasant tone of two men who liked each other, and who were engaged in the ancient ritual of negotiating through an apparent impasse to a real one. Urzoth sat against the wall throughout and did not speak except once, when Piers asked her directly whether the Stonecrest war leader had been carrying documentation of the Durnholt advance. She told him yes, a sealed letter of credit drawn on the Durnholt factor in Milford town itself. Piers pulled out his salvage ledger from the field operation and found it in 4 minutes. Letter of credit, sealed, recovered from a body matching the war leader's description, currently held in the company lock chest pending identification. The letter of credit was drawn for 3,000 marks. Piers could not simply return it. The company's salvage rights were legal under the Borderland Compact, and he had obligations to his commander. But what he could do, and what he did in the end, because Jedediah had indeed pulled his supply wagon out of a creek crossing in a February freeze, while Piers's fingers had gone too numb to manage the wheel brace himself, was to exchange the letter for a cash advance of 2,000 marks from the company's discretionary fund, noting in his ledger that it was a purchased intelligence settlement. 2,000 marks was not 10,000, but it was something. It was a real number. And as Jedediah pointed out to Urzoth, when they had left the camp and were back on the road south with the pay draft folded against his chest for safekeeping, a man like Crane who wanted the marks as leverage wanted them because he wanted something else. "He wants the Stonecrest clan to acknowledge his authority over border keep," Urzoth said. She had worked it out. He could see, over those 2 hours of sitting quietly against the wall. He doesn't care about the money specifically. He wants to be the man the Stonecrest clan paid. He wants the recognition. "So we give him that," Jedediah said. "I will not the reality," he said. "The performance of it, there's a difference." 2,000 marks delivered formally in front of witnesses, with a clan envoy making the payment, that's a story Crane can tell. The remaining 8,000 he forgives as a gesture of goodwill and borderland stability, which makes him look magnanimous rather than outmaneuvered. He gets the story and he gets the 2,000 and the clan gets their people back. Urzoth walked in silence for a long moment. The road south had opened up from the mountain track onto a wide, beaten-earth drove road that moved through patchy woodland and the occasional farmstead, and the sky was high and clear above them in the particular luminous way it got in the borderlands in autumn, when the light came in at a low angle and turned everything gold for a few hours in the afternoon. "You have thought about this kind of thing before," she said. "I spent a year working as a factor's assistant before I went into trapping," he said. "Before the partner line in Calver Valley. It's all the same thing, really. What does the other person actually need versus what they say they need. "And what do you need, Jedediah Easton?" she asked. It was a direct question, asked with a directness that was somehow louder than the surrounding quiet, and he felt it land the way he felt the cold when he stepped out of a warm cabin, fully, all at once. He looked at her. She was watching him walk, amber eyes on the side of his face, expression unreadable in the way that was starting to feel less like blankness and more like listening. "I need to get 12 people out of Cranefort without getting arrested or killed," he said. "After that I'll let you know." She was quiet again. Then quietly, "That is another practical answer." "I'm a very practical person," he said. "You are," she said. "And you are also not telling me the whole of it." He looked straight ahead at the road. He could feel her looking at him. He thought about 4 years on a mountain line and the way the silence had been fine. He had honestly been fine, and the way this particular silence felt different in a way that had nothing to do with the road or the wind or the gold-tilted autumn light. "No," he said, "not the whole of it." She didn't push. They walked on. They made camp that night at the edge of a worked field, in a hollow where 3 old apple trees had been left standing when the field was cleared. The apples were past season and small and sharp, and Urzoth ate 4 of them with a systematic efficiency that he found inexplicably wonderful. He made a proper fire and cooked a real meal travel rations, supplemented with a brace of birds he'd taken with the bow in the late afternoon, and they sat close to the fire because the autumn nights this far down from the mountain were cold in a different way than the high-altitude cold. Wetter, heavier, more committed. She was close enough that he could have touched her without reaching, and he was deeply aware of this in the way you're aware of something that you're trying not to be obvious about being aware of. She knew. He was fairly sure she knew. He was fairly sure she'd known since at least the second day in camp, when he'd looked at her by firelight and not quite managed to look away fast enough. She hadn't said anything and she hadn't pulled back, which was either indifference or something considerably more interesting. "Tell me about Stonecrest," he said. She told him. Not the history lesson version, not the official clan record, but the real version, the high valley in the eastern mountains where the clan's permanent settlement was, the long halls built into the mountainside where the clan elders held council, the smell of smoke and pine, and the particular fermented drink made from mountain berries that tasted terrible until it didn't. She told him about her mother, who had been a healer and had died in a fever winter when Urzoth was 12, and her uncle, who was the current clan elder and the closest thing to family she'd returned to after every campaign. She told it without sentimentality as fact, but he heard the texture of the life underneath the facts. In return, he told her about the Calver Valley line, his partner Wren, who had been his oldest friend and who had married a woman from Southold and moved to farm country, and with whom Jedediah still exchanged letters twice a year. He told her about the first winter on the mountain alone, which had been harder than he'd expected, and which he'd gotten through by sheer stubbornness, and the discovery that he was actually quite good at being alone when he didn't have another option. He told her about the mountain itself, the particular ridge where the best trapping was, the ice formations that built on the north face in deep winter, the way the light changed at altitude in a way that never got ordinary. She listened to all of this with her chin on her knees and her eyes on the fire, and she asked precise, interested questions about the parts she didn't understand, and Jedediah thought, "I could talk to this woman for the rest of my life and not run out of things to say," which was a thought that surprised him with its clarity and its calm. He was still thinking about it when she turned her head and looked at him, and the firelight was in her eyes, and she said, "You are looking at me." "I am," he said. "You have been looking at me for some time," she said. "Yes," he said. She regarded him for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand slowly, with the deliberate care of someone making a decision and executing it cleanly, and held it in both of hers. Her hands were enormous and warm and calloused in patterns that spoke to a lifetime of the kind of work that left marks. "I did not expect this," she said quietly. "Any of this. "Neither did I," he said. "I am still deciding what to make of you," she said. "Take your time," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him for a long, still moment. Then she lifted his hand and pressed her mouth to his knuckles, not gentle, exactly, more deliberate, more purposeful, and it moved through him like a struck bell, clear and resonant. "Stonecrest has a word for a human man who carries an orc woman off a battlefield," she said. "What's the word?" he asked. "Graktil," she said. "It means, roughly, one who does not know enough to look away." "Is that a compliment?" he said. "Among my people," she said, "it is the highest one." She set his hand down but didn't release it, and they sat together by the fire while the night settled around them. And Jedediah thought that the mountain silence he'd gotten so good at living in had just become a whole different kind of quiet. Cranefort was not a castle. It was the kind of manor house that wanted to be a castle, high stone walls, a gatehouse with an iron portcullis, watchtowers at the corners built by a man who had enough money to look impressive, and not enough imagination to look anything other than aggressive. It sat at the center of a wide, flat-bottomed valley that had been cleared for farmland on 3 sides and commanded the main road south, which was why a middling lord like Crane had enough leverage to make a ransom demand and expect it to be taken seriously. They saw it from the road crest an hour before sundown on the 4th day of travel. The valley was occupied, a small market, perhaps, or a public event of some kind, because there was a crowd gathered in the open ground before the manor gate. Jedediah counted what he could from distance and estimated 40 people, mostly men. "What is that?" Urzoth said. "I don't know," he said. "Stay back a moment." She stayed, which told him how much the 4 days of travel had built something between them, because on day 1 she would not have stayed for anything. He moved down the road to a lower angle and looked harder, and what he saw made something cold move through his chest. The crowd was gathered around a makeshift pen, a rope pen post enclosure in the road. Standing in the pen, chained at the wrists to a post at the pen's center, where what he could now see were a dozen figures, green-skinned, large, in the rough clothing of people taken suddenly and without preparation. Orc. 12 of them, ranging from what looked like elder age to the recently adult, and they were standing in the late afternoon sun in an open pen in front of a crowd that was, even from this distance, too loud for anything good. And at the pen's edge, standing on a raised platform of stacked crates, was a man in a fur-lined coat reading from a paper in a voice that carried even up the road incline. He was conducting a sale. Urzoth had not stayed back. She was at his shoulder, and he could feel the change in her as clearly as he could feel a temperature drop, the sudden absolute stillness, and then the beginning of a different kind of movement underneath it. "Urzoth," he said. "He is selling them today," she said, her voice entirely flat. He moved it forward. "Urzoth," he said again. "I am going down there," she said. "Yes," he said. "We both are together, but we do this right." He stepped in front of her, not blocking, just making her look at him. "We have 2,000 marks. We walk in there with the pay draft and I make Crane's story for him loudly in front of witnesses. That's leverage, that works. What doesn't work is if you go in there angry enough that he has cause to chain you up next to them, which is exactly what he'll do if you give him an opening." She looked at him. Her jaw was set so hard he could see the muscle working. Her fists were at her sides and her amber eyes were incandescent. "I know," she said. It came out like a blade being drawn. "I know you know," he said. "So we walk in together and we do the one thing that actually gets them out." She breathed. Once. Twice. The stillness held, and then she nodded once, and he turned and they walked down the road toward Cranefort together. The crowd heard them coming before they saw them. The sound changed, the auctioneer's voice faltered, and by the time they stepped into the open ground before the gate, 40 faces were turned toward them, and the crowd had arranged itself in the instinctive human geometry of a barrier. Jedediah did not slow down. He walked through the crowd like he was walking into a room he had reserved, with Urzoth half a step behind and slightly to his right, and he watched the crowd flinch and open and reclose around them. Muttering, angry, uncertain, and he kept walking until he was standing at the base of the platform and looking up at a man who was, indeed, exactly what he'd expected. Fat with comfort, mean with authority, and just smart enough to know that what was happening here had suddenly become more complicated than he'd planned. "Harwick Crane," Jedediah said. The man stared down at him. "Who are you?" "I'm the representative of an interested party," Jedediah said, loudly enough for the whole crowd to hear. He liked crowds. He liked their acoustics. "And I'm here to tell you that this transaction doesn't need to happen today because you're about to be paid." Crane's expression shifted. He was looking past Jedediah at Urzoth. "Is that a senior envoy of the Stonecrest clan?" Jedediah said. "Authorized to complete the payment you requested. 2,000 marks, delivered in good faith as the opening of a formal settlement agreement, with the remainder of your demand forgiven in exchange for the immediate release of the Stonecrest kin currently in your custody, and a formal acknowledgement of your role as a man of the borderland who deals in good faith." He said it all in one breath, clearly, making sure the crowd heard every word. He needed witnesses. He needed this to be a story Crane could live in. Crane stared at him. "That's less than you asked," someone in the crowd said. "It's 2,000 marks in hand," Jedediah said, to the crowd as much as to Crane. "Delivered in 4 days after the demand was made, which is considerable speed for a clan that had to cross mountain territory to get here. Lord Crane gets the recognition of a completed payment, a formal clan settlement, and whatever the remaining 8,000 marks was worth to him in political weight becomes worth considerably more in goodwill with the borderland clans, which is something every landowner in this valley is going to need when the Redvane contract expires and the buffer force goes home." He hadn't known he was going to say the last part until he said it, but he saw it land on Crane's face, and he saw Crane recognize it as true, and he saw, beneath the fat comfort and the mean authority, a man who was afraid of the future and trying to buy insurance against it. The crowd was not quiet exactly, but it had changed. It was listening. Crane looked at Urzoth. Urzoth looked back at him, and she was doing the thing she'd done in the Redvane camp, the absolute, unmoving presence, the quality of not needing anything from him, and Jedediah saw Crane feel the weight of it and decide. "Chain them," someone in the crowd yelled. A man near the back, young, emboldened by numbers. "Chain them both." There Jedediah turned and looked at the man. He didn't say anything. He just looked, with the direct, patient, entirely unconcerned look of a man who had spent 4 years alone in a place where there were things considerably more dangerous than a crowd, and something in that look communicated that the man would regret making this more complicated. The man went quiet. Crane stepped down from the platform. The negotiation took another hour, conducted in the manor house's gatehouse entrance with 2 of Crane's household staff as witnesses, and it was tense and grinding, and there were 3 moments where Jedediah thought it was going to fall apart. But it didn't fall apart, because Crane wanted the story and the story required the resolution, and in the end he signed a release document and took the pay draft and sent a man to unlock the pen. Urzoth went to her people the moment the chains came off the post. Jedediah watched her move through the crowd's fringe to the pen, watched the chained figures see her and understand who she was, watched the particular physical change that went through a group of people when the person who has come to get them is actually there. She spoke to them quickly and quietly in the Stonecrest dialect, one hand on a shoulder here, a clasp of a wrist there, not tender in any performative way but intensely, practically caring in the same matter-of-fact way she did everything. She brought them out of the pen and across the open ground toward the road, 12 people moving together, and she walked at the front of them, and the crowd parted, and Jedediah fell in alongside her without thinking about it. Her hand found his as they walked through the crowd. It was quick and certain, and her fingers closed over his, and she didn't look at him, but the grip was deliberate. The crowd that had been a barrier became a corridor, and they walked through it together, and by the time they were on the road heading north with 12 freed people behind them, Something that had been building between them for 5 days resolved itself into a certainty that felt like a door swinging open. They made camp that night at a large enough site that the 12 freed Stonecrest people could settle comfortably. 3 of them had minor injuries, which Urzoth tended with the same kit she'd used to supplement his on her own wounds, and her efficiency and authority over them was absolute and natural. She was their ranking warrior, their rescuer, and she was clearly loved by most of them. There was an elder woman who held her face in both hands when they first touched, saying something low and continuous in the clan dialect and watching it. Jedediah felt the particular warmth of seeing a person be fully known by others. He cooked for 15 people, which required resourcefulness and a willingness to go heavy on the broth and light on the meat, and nobody complained. The elder woman, her name was Gata, Urzoth told him later, kept looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, and eventually came over and sat across from him and said, in careful, accented common tongue, "You are the Graktil." "I've been told that word," he said. "She told us," Gata said. "On the road. She said it the way she used to talk about the high mountain back home when she was young and had never been there yet." She looked at him with bright, old eyes, like it was a thing she already knew was true before she found it. Jedediah looked at the fire. Then he looked at Urzoth across it, who was doing something practical with the freed people and not looking back, except for the once sideways glance that she gave him that she probably hadn't meant to give and which went through him like a heated wire. "I need to tell her something," he said. "Tell her then," Gata said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. The journey north took 6 days, moving at the pace of 12 people who had been chained and underfed for 3 weeks. They moved through the borderlands autumn, which was fierce and golden and smelled of turned earth and wood smoke from distant farmsteads, and the slow pace was not unwelcome to Jedediah, who found reasons in most hours of those 6 days to be walking alongside Urzoth. They talked. Constantly, easily, the way 2 people talk when they have discovered a mutual frequency and are startled by it. They argued about practical things, the best route north, the merit of a ford versus a bridge, whether the brace of birds he took on the 3rd morning was more efficiently cooked whole or in pieces. And the arguments had a quality of warmth that he'd not experienced before, because they were arguments with someone whose intelligence he respected completely, which made being wrong occasionally a pleasure rather than an embarrassment. She told him more about Stonecrest. He told her more about the mountain line. He told her about the view from the high ridge on a clear winter morning, when the whole of the lowland range was visible, and the snow on the slopes caught the rising sun and turned everything a specific shade of rose gold that he had never found a good word for. She listened and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "In the clan dialect, that color is called Krethver, the first light that is also the last dark." "That's exactly it," he said. The precision of it moved him in a way he hadn't expected. "That is exactly what it is." She looked at him sideways. "Then come and see it from the Stonecrest Heights someday," she said. "It is better from higher up." "I'd like that," he said, and meant it with everything. On the 4th evening, when the group had settled into camp and Gata had managed to commandeer all of the remaining hard biscuit in a way that allowed no argument, Jedediah and Urzoth sat apart from the others at the edge of the camp where a stream ran through a stand of white-barked alder trees, and the sound of it made a kind of private space. He said, "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him. The firelight from the main camp reached them only partly, and her face was half dark and half gold, and he had spent 9 days looking at her face, and it still did something to him every time. "The practical answer I gave you on the road," he said, "about why I was helping." "I remember it," she said. "It was true," he said, "but it wasn't the whole of it." He looked at the stream, then back at her. "I've been alone on that mountain for 4 years and I was fine with it. I was genuinely fine with it. I wasn't suffering. I wasn't waiting for anything. And then you were standing in that field and I walked toward you and something shifted. And I want to be honest with you about that because you've been honest with me and you deserve the same." She was very still. "I don't know what you want," he said. "I'm not assuming anything." But I know what I want, and I'm done pretending it's entirely practical." Urzoth looked at him for a long moment. Her amber eyes in the half-light were steady and deep, and he held them and waited and did not look away. "Among my people," she said slowly, "when a warrior has chosen someone, they do not announce it. They act." She reached out and took his face in both of her large, warm hands and held it the way Gata had held hers, with the full present. "This is what is real quality of absolute intention. Jedediah Easton," she said, "I have been acting for 9 days." He kissed her, or she kissed him. It was simultaneous enough that it didn't matter, and it was nothing like gentle, which seemed right for both of them, certain and deep, and the kind of thing that declares itself rather than asking permission. And when it ended and he looked at her in the half-dark, she was looking back at him with something that was not quite a smile but was more than a smile, was the thing that a smile is the surface of. "Gractil," she said softly. "One who does not know enough to look away," he said. "No," she said. "I told you that wrong. The fuller meaning is," she searched for the common tongue equivalent, "one who sees clearly, and looking away is not possible because what he sees is true." He took her hand. She let him. The stream ran on in the Whitalder dark, and the campfire burned orange behind them, and 12 people who were going home were sleeping nearby. And Jedediah sat with Urzoth Bloodhorn in the last of the autumn dark, and was, for the first time in 4 years, exactly where he was supposed to be. They reached the mountain road 3 days later, and there parted ways with Gata and the other freed Stonecrest people, who had an escort from a cousin clan warrior who had met them at the Milford crossroads. The parting took time, because there was the matter of thanks to be conducted, which among the Stonecrest involved a good deal of formal speech from the elders and was, Jedediah suspected, considerably abbreviated on his behalf by Urzoth's whispered intercessions. But Gata embraced him like a woman embracing something she intended to see again, and told him, in common tongue, that he was welcome in Stonecrest for the rest of his life. When they had gone, the mountain road was quiet around him and Urzoth, and the sky was that particular gray-blue that came before the first afternoon clouds. "They will go straight to your uncle," he said. "They will tell him everything," she said, with the tone of someone who finds this inevitable rather than comfortable. "Is that bad?" he asked. "He will want to meet you," she said. "Does that bother you?" She considered it with her usual deliberate honesty. "He will ask questions," she said. "He will ask whether you understand what it means to be in Stonecrest's debt, and what you want in return, and whether you understand the difficulty of being a human man connected to an orc clan in a borderland that is still choosing its future. Those are fair questions," he said. "He will also," she said, with the slight change in her voice that meant she was being careful, "ask what we are to each other." "What should I tell him?" he asked. She looked at him. The wind came down the mountain road and moved the loose strands of her hair across her face, and she didn't push it away. "Tell him," she said, "that I have chosen." The weight of it landed exactly as she intended. "Then I'll tell him that," he said. She took his arm, easy and natural, and they started up the mountain road. And he thought about the high ridge and the winter morning and the color called Crethver, the first light that is also the last dark, and how she had asked him to come and see it from higher up. They stopped that night at a mountain way station, a stone building no larger than a single room maintained by the road compact for travelers and tradespeople who worked the high passes. It had a fireplace and 2 pallets and a store of dry wood, and it was clean in the utilitarian way of things meant to be functional rather than comfortable. They made a fire together and ate from what remained of the trail food, and the way station was warm and small, and they were both entirely aware of what the small and warm meant, and neither of them pretended otherwise. She was the one who moved first. Of course she was. It was in her, this decisive quality, this claiming, and he met her at the center of it with the full, willing presence of a man who had decided and was done deciding in favor of caution. She was large and warm, and she held him with a certainty that he felt in his whole frame, and he gave her everything he had, All of the 4 years and the mountain and the thing he hadn't known he was waiting for, and she received it with the same totality with which she did all things. Later, they lay by the fire and she had his hand in hers, and was tracing the trapper's calluses on his fingers with one careful thumbnail, and the fire had gone low and orange, and the mountain wind was a sound rather than a presence. "You will need a different shelter for winter," she said. "The linta will not hold in the high snow." "There's a cabin on the north slope," he said. "I've used it before. It's solid, 3 rooms. 3 rooms, she said. "One is a workroom," he said, "for the pelts." "I know what a trapper's workroom is," she said. He could hear the warmth of the almost laugh in it. "The other 2 would be comfortable enough," he said. She was quiet then. "I have no fixed obligations until the spring council." "That's a winter's worth of time," he said. "It is," she said. He turned his head to look at her in the low firelight. "Urzoth." She turned to look back. "Stay," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, and he looked back, and neither of them looked away. Then she lifted his hand to her mouth and pressed her lips to his knuckles, the same way she had on that first night under the apple trees, but different now, warmer, fuller, settled in itself. "Graktil," she said, and that was the answer. The cabin on the north slope was exactly as he had described. 3 rooms, solid timbered, built by some previous occupant with an eye for longevity. The chimney drew well. The windows were shuttered with solid wooden boards that kept the wind out, and the roof had been relaid with good stone tile at some point in the recent past. It held the mountain cold out the way a good structure should, by simple virtue of being well made. They spent the first week putting it right for winter occupation. This involved a good deal of physical work, sealing gaps in the log walls with moss and clay mixture, chopping and stacking wood, checking the chimney, pulling the shutters to ensure they sealed, and they worked together with the same natural coordination he'd noticed on the road. She was immensely strong, which in practical terms meant that things which would have taken him an entire afternoon took half one, and she worked with a focused attention to quality that matched his own. He retrieved his cached furs from the tree above the old camp and worked the trap line through the high pine, setting his runs for the winter season. She came with him on the long days, learning the line the way she learned everything, by watching once and asking precise questions and then simply knowing. She had a tracker's eye, which he should have expected from a warrior, but which surprised him anyway with its precision. The way she read ground sign and animal movement, and weather shift from details he'd trained himself to notice over years. She was better at it than he was within 2 weeks, which he told her, and she told him she was not, and he told her to prove it, and she took him out in the early morning and showed him 3 separate fox runs he had missed, and he went home and thought about it and came back the next morning and admitted she was right, and she gave him the full burn amber look and said nothing, which was, he'd learned, her version of profound satisfaction. In the evenings, they cooked together and ate together and talked the way they had on the road, about everything, about nothing, about the high mountain ridge and what it looked like in different seasons, and the clan hall at Stonecrest and what she had been like at 20 and what he had been like before Calver Valley. She told him things she prefaced with, "I have not told anyone this," in a tone that wasn't fragile but was precise. It was a statement of choice, not vulnerability. She was choosing to tell him. He understood the difference. He told her about the winter his second year on the line when a rockfall had broken his ankle 2 days' walk from the cabin, and he'd set it himself and crawled for most of a day before he could stand. And she listened and did not offer sympathy, which was right. But when he'd finished, she put her hand flat against his chest, over his heart, and left it there for a long moment, which was better than sympathy. A letter arrived in the 3rd week via the Milford Post rider, who came up the mountain road once a month even in the approach to winter, because there were enough people in the high settlements to make the trip worthwhile. The letter was addressed to Jedediah Easton and bore the Stonecrest clan seal. It was from her uncle. His name was Urzoth Bloodhorn, and he was the current clan elder, and he had, according to the letter, been fully briefed by Gata on the events at Cranefort and the road north. The letter was formal and measured, and contained a formal invitation for Jedediah Easton to present himself to the Stonecrest Clan Council in the spring, at his convenience, to receive the clan's formal acknowledgement of his service and to be registered in the clan's memory records. And at the very end, in a different hand, a large, blunt-lettered script that he recognized 3 words: "He writes well." He looked up from the letter. Urzoth was across the room, doing something with the trap tackle, and she was looking at him with an expression of studied neutrality that was 100% unconvincing. "You wrote to him," Jedediah said. "I sent a letter," she said. "What did it say?" "It said that I had chosen," she said, "and asked him to acknowledge the man I had chosen before Spring Council made it political." He looked at the 3 words in her handwriting at the bottom of the formal letter. "He writes well. This is his response to being told you've chosen someone." "He is a laconic man," she said. "He writes well," Jedediah said. "He means it as a compliment," she said. Among the elders, to write well means to think clearly, to say what you mean. He read your words from the Cranefort transaction. Gata took notes. She always takes notes, and he found them well constructed. "I'm glad he approves," Jedediah said. "He does not yet fully approve," she said. "He is reserving judgment until spring, but he is not opposed," which from Dracker Bloodhorn is, she searched for the right word, a very warm welcome. Jedediah put the letter down and went across the room and kissed her, which she permitted and then improved upon considerably. And after that neither of them spoke about the letter for some time. The winter came in hard in the 2nd month, the way mountain winters came, not gradually but decisively, as if the cold had been waiting just outside and had finally gotten tired of waiting and moved in with all its furniture. The first deep snow fell in a single night and left 3 feet on the flat and more in the drifts, and the morning was that brilliant, blinding white that made the shadows turn blue. He took her up to the high ridge on a clear morning in the 4th week of deep winter, when the temperature was sharp enough to make the air smell like iron, and the snow was crusted and hard-packed, and the footing was reliable on the familiar path he'd walked for 4 years. She was quiet as they climbed, which was not her usual quiet, more focused, more present, like she was paying attention to something he couldn't see yet. He brought her to the exact place on the ridge where the view opened up, and they stood there in the first light of morning as the sun crested the far eastern peaks, and the lowland range below was still in shadow, and the slopes around them were in the rose-gold early light, and he watched her see it. Crethver. She was very still. The light was in her face, turning her skin from pine shadow green to something warm and complex and beautiful, and her amber eyes were wide with it. He did not say anything. This was one of those moments that did not require anything added. After a long time she said quietly, "You were right. I had some practice at looking at it," he said. She turned to look at him, and the light was still on her face, and she looked at him with something he had come to understand was not the measuring look and not the hawk stoop and not the almost laugh, but a 4th thing that was hers alone and that she gave only to him, an open, unguarded recognition that had nothing calculating in it. "I love you," she said, direct and certain, the way she did all things, as if love was a fact of the same order as a mountain or a frost. He took her face in his hands. He had to reach up for it, and she bent toward him, and neither of them made anything of the difference. And he looked at her in the Crethver light and said, "I love you, Urzoth Bloodhorn. I have loved you since you were standing in a field with an axe you could barely lift, and you looked at me like you couldn't decide whether to kill me or ask my name." She made the sound that was almost a laugh, and then it became the real laugh, which he had heard only a handful of times and which was always worth everything. "I had decided against killing you within the first 2 sentences," she said. "I'm flattered," he said. "You should be," she said. "I am very fast with an axe." He kissed her in the Crethver light on the high ridge, and the mountains were all around them, and the winter was fierce and cold, and the world below was still in shadow, and none of it mattered at all. Spring came up the mountain in stages. the way it always did, first a change in the light, then a loosening of the snow, then the first mud on the south-facing slopes, then the birch and alder putting out their first tentative green. Jedediah worked the line hard through the final weeks of trapping season, pulling the winter's take, and Urzoth worked alongside him as she had all season, and the cabin had become something neither of them discussed, but both of them simply inhabited with the settled, natural ease of a thing that had found its right shape. They were preparing to go to Stonecrest for the spring council when the second letter arrived. This one was not from her uncle. It was from Aldrich Piers, the Redvane quartermaster, written in his careful, meticulous hand. The letter was brief and informative. The Redvane Company's contract in the borderlands had been completed. They were withdrawing south. The borderland territory was being transferred per treaty to a joint administration board that included human landowner representatives, and in here Piers had underlined the words, 2 appointed Orc clan liaisons. He wrote that the appointment was new, unprecedented, and that a senior Stonecrest warrior had been publicly named as one of the 2 Orc representatives, which made the spring council political in the most immediate sense. Urzoth read the letter twice. Then she put it down and was quiet for a long moment. "Your uncle named you," Jedediah said. "He will have had cause," she said. "The spring council becomes larger than I expected. Does that change anything for you?" He asked. She looked at him steadily. "It changes my responsibilities," she said. "It does not change what I have chosen." "The liaison role, that's a fixed residence in Borderkeep, isn't it?" he said. "Part of the year," she said. "And Borderkeep is 3 days from the mountain line," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at his hands. He looked at the cabin, the 3 rooms, the workroom, the good chimney, the winter's stacked wood still half remaining. He looked at her. "I've been thinking," he said, "that the Borderkeep side of the range has a trap line no one's working, because the previous man who worked it moved south 2 years back and the territory's been sitting open. The furs on that side come out different, more valley animals, different market." She watched him. "And Borderkeep's got a trading post," he said. "I've sold to them before, though not recently. They'd take a direct supply deal probably. Better margins than hauling everything over the pass." She said nothing. She was looking at him with the open, unguarded recognition and something behind it that was so steady and so fierce he felt it in his ribs. "I'd need to establish a base on that side of the range," he said. "A cabin or find one to fix up. It'd be work. First season would be lean, probably." He shrugged. "I've done lean seasons." "You would move your line," she said. "For me." "I'd move my line to where the work is good and my person is," he said. "Those happen to be the same place." She crossed the cabin in 3 strides and took his face in her hands again, both of them, and she tilted his head up and looked at him, and she was so present, so entirely there, that he felt seen in a way that reached somewhere deep and warm. "Jedediah Easton," she said. "Urzoth Bloodhorn," he said. "Stay," she said, and it was the word he had said to her at the way station fire, given back to him in her voice, with all the weight of a winter's worth of truth behind it. "Always," he said. They came into Stonecrest in the first real warmth of spring, up the long valley road that led to the clan's mountain settlement, and the road was lined with people who had come out to see them. Not a celebration, exactly, more the natural congregation of a community that knew something significant was arriving. Gata was at the front, and she saw Jedediah first and gave him a look of absolute vindication that needed no words. Children ran alongside the road and called to Urzoth in the clan dialect, and she answered them with a formality that she clearly couldn't quite maintain, because the children were unimpressed by formality, and at least 2 of them grabbed her hands to pull her along. Dracker Bloodhorn was waiting at the clan hall. He was older than Jedediah had imagined, deep into his 6th decade, built like the mountain itself, with Urzoth's amber eyes and more gray than green in his remaining hair, and a stillness so profound it felt like standing close to something geological. He looked at Jedediah for a long moment. "You are the man my niece writes to me about," he said. "I don't know what she wrote," Jedediah said. "Enough," Dracker said. His common tongue was precise and accented and measured. "You went a crane fort with 2,000 marks and came back with 12 people, my people." "We went together," Jedediah said. Drakar's gaze moved to Urzoth and back. "She chose well," he said, and there was in it the full weight of a man who did not say things of that magnitude lightly. Jedediah felt it land. He felt it land all the way down. "I did not deserve the choosing," he said. "I'm working on it." Something crossed Drakar's face that was the geological equivalent of a smile. "Graktil," he said. And then to Urzoth, something in the clan dialect that made Gata, standing behind the elder, press both hands flat over her heart. Later Urzoth told him what Drakar had said. He had said, "Bring him inside." The Spring Council was 3 days of formal business. Political in the new way the borderland was becoming political, with the joint administration structure taking shape and Urzoth's role within it being defined and debated and refined. She was ferocious in the council sessions, precise and uncompromising on the things that mattered and surprisingly flexible on the things that were only symbolic. And he watched her from his observer's position at the side of the hall, and felt the same thing he had felt on the field and on the road and on the ridge and in the way station and all the winter long. The specific, irreversible certainty of someone who has found the right person and knows it. On the third evening, after the council sessions were done and the formal acknowledgments had been made, there was a gathering in the hall that had the quality of a celebration without quite being one food and fire, and the particular loud warmth of a community that had survived a hard thing and was still here. He was sitting with Gata, who was feeding him things from the table that she clearly intended him to find impressive, and he was finding them impressive, when Urzoth came through the hall toward him. The crowd parted for her the way crowds parted for people who carry that quality of total presence, and she came directly to him and sat beside him and took his hand without any comment on the company around them, easy and plain and certain. Gata looked at them and said something in the clan dialect that he didn't understand, but which made the people nearest them laugh with the warm, inclusive quality of a shared recognition. "What did she say?" he asked. Urzoth's expression was what he now knew was her contained version of genuine happiness. She said that the Graktil has survived the Spring Council, which is a harder battlefield than most. "I didn't do anything in the council," he said. "You did everything. You were there," she said. "That was everything." He looked at her. She looked back. The fire was in the hall and the clan was around them and the mountain spring was outside and she was choosing him, had been choosing him, would go on choosing him in the plain, certain, uncomplicated way she had chosen all things since the morning he'd walked onto a battlefield and found her standing in it. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles. She made the sound that was the real laugh. "Graktil," she said. "Always," he said. 3 months later, they were on the border keep side of the range, and the cabin they had found and fixed up was not yet fully finished. 2 walls of the second room were still rough timber waiting for the clay daub. But the chimney drew perfectly, and the view out the east-facing window was the long valley in full summer green, and the trap line on this side of the range was everything he'd hoped it would be. Urzoth's administrative work took her to border keep itself twice a month, and he went with her when he could and stayed on the line when he couldn't, and the distance between them on the days he stayed had the easy quality of 2 people who are entirely certain of each other and who carry the other with them the way you carry the mountain. Not as a burden, but as an orientation, a fixed point in the compass of the world. On a particular evening in late summer, she came back from border keep a day earlier than expected, and he was outside the half-finished cabin splitting wood for the pile when he heard her come up the track. He set the axe down and turned to look at her, and she was coming through the long evening light with her travel leathers dusty from the road and her hair loose from the braid, and she was looking at him from 20 yards away with that open, unguarded recognition that he had fallen in love with on a high ridge in the Crethver light. She walked up to him and stopped and stood there for a moment, the 2 of them in the summer evening quiet with the valley spread below them and the mountain at their back. "You finished the wood pile," she said. "Half of it," he said. "I'll finish the rest tomorrow." "I came back early," she said. "I see that," he said. "Good session, productive," she said. The Joint Administration Compact was signed today, full borderland recognition. The Stonecrest clan and 3 other clans are formally acknowledged as stakeholder parties. She paused. "It will hold. I think it will actually hold." "It'll hold because you made it hold," he said. She looked at him. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me then," he said. "When I was on that field," she said, "after the fight, when it was over and there was no one left, I was not afraid. I was not afraid of death. I have faced death before." She was looking at him steadily. "But I was," she searched for the word, "unwilling. I was not ready, not because I was not done fighting. Because I felt very clearly that there was something I had not yet found." She stopped. "I did not know what it was." "And now," he said. She looked at him with the full, warm, steady truth of her. "Now I know," she said. He went to her. She met him at the middle of the distance between them, and took him in her arms the way she always did, fully, certainly, with that complete and total presence that he would never stop being moved by. And he held her back with the same entirety. And the summer evening was around them, and the valley was below them, and the mountain was behind them, and the 2 of them were exactly, irreversibly, completely where they were supposed to be. Above them, the first stars were beginning to show in the darkening east. In the Stonecrest dialect, the moment just before full dark when the first star appeared had a word that Urzoth had taught him in the way station on their second night: Krethel, the threshold of finding. The moment when the dark shows you what it has been holding. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. She already knew. They stood together in the Krethel light, in front of the half-built cabin, and the valley was quiet, and the mountain was enormous, and neither of them was alone.